I've emptied our accounts and I'm moving to Miami. Good luck with your annoying mom." The laughter that followed cut through the sterile hospital waiting room, causing several heads to turn in my direction. I stepped into an alcove, pressing the phone closer to my ear. "Jack, what are you talking about?" "You heard me, Martha," my husband replied, his voice light and amused. 26 years of marriage and I'm finally free. I've transferred everything. Checking, savings, investment accounts. All gone. I deserve this. My hand trembled, but I kept my voice steady. "I understand," I said, watching through the window as doctors wheeled my sedated mother toward surgery. "I need to go now. Mom's heading into the operating room." "Of course she is," Jack snorted. "That woman's health issues have always been more important than our marriage. Enjoy the medical bills." The line went dead. I slipped the phone into my pocket, took a deep breath, and returned to the waiting area. The neurosurgeon had been clear. My mother's condition wasn't life-threatening, but without this procedure, a full recovery from her stroke would be impossible. The cost was substantial, even with insurance, which was why I'd planned to draw from our joint savings account, the account Jack had apparently just emptied. My name is Martha Calloway, 49 years old, an accounting manager at a mid-sized publishing company in Chicago. After supporting Jack through law school, multiple career changes, and a failed business venture, I'd finally established financial stability for us both. We had no children. Jack had never wanted them, so I'd poured my nurturing energy into my career and caring for my mother since my father's death 3 years ago. Jack had always resented the time I spent with her, especially after her stroke 4 months ago. "She's manipulating you," he'd insist. "She could do more for herself if she tried." His callousness had been a growing source of tension between us, but I never imagined he would take such drastic action, especially not while I was at the hospital for her surgery. I approached the nurse's station, my mind racing. "Excuse me, has my mother gone into surgery yet? Eleanor Bennett?" "Yes, just now," the nurse replied kindly. "It will be about 4 hours. Is there someone who can wait with you?" "No," I said. "I'm alone." As I settled into an uncomfortable waiting room chair, I unlocked my phone and opened my banking app, praying that Jack had been bluffing. But the balances confirmed his boast. Our checking account showed $43.17, savings completely empty, and our joint investment account, which yesterday had held over $300,000, now displayed an error message about insufficient privileges. What the nurse couldn't see, what Jack didn't know, was that his call hadn't surprised me nearly as much as it should have. Because for the past 2 months, I'd been watching, waiting, and preparing for exactly this scenario. The only surprise was his timing, and the fact that he hadn't yet realized what he was up against. Jack and I met during our senior year of college. He was the charismatic pre-law student who captivated every room, and I was the pragmatic accounting major who somehow caught his attention at a mutual friend's party. The opposites attract dynamic worked for us initially. My steady reliability balanced his spontaneous nature, while his outgoing personality pulled me out of my comfort zone. The early years of our marriage were challenging but rewarding. I took an entry-level accounting position, while Jack attended law school, managing our modest finances carefully to keep us afloat. We delayed having children until Jack was established, though as his career progressed, his enthusiasm for parenthood waned until he finally admitted he never wanted kids at all. It was a painful adjustment to my life plans, but I adapted, focusing instead on building our financial security and supporting Jack's career ambitions. Those ambitions proved costly over the years. 3 years into a promising position at a prestigious law firm, Jack decided corporate law wasn't fulfilling and quit to join a small practice specializing in environmental law. The pay cut was substantial, but I supported his pursuit of more meaningful work. 5 years later, he left law entirely to start a business consultancy, which failed after 18 months and nearly $100,000 of our savings. Through each transition, I remained the steady income, the financial planner, the practical voice ensuring we recovered from each setback. When my father died unexpectedly, leaving my mother emotionally devastated and struggling with early-stage dementia, Jack initially seemed supportive of my increased responsibilities. But as months passed, his resentment grew. My mother's stroke 4 months ago only intensified his hostility. "She's going to drain us financially," he argued after learning about her needed surgery. "We're approaching retirement age, Martha. We should be planning our future, not spending everything on her medical bills." I reminded him that the money was there. We could afford it. But his objections grew more vehement. In retrospect, I should have recognized the warning signs. His sudden interest in our investment accounts, questions about our banking passwords, late nights spent on his computer, with the screen angled away from me. The first concrete red flag appeared 6 weeks ago, when I noticed login attempts to our accounts from an unfamiliar device. Then came the browser history showing searches for best places to retire in Florida and states with favorable divorce laws. Most telling was the phone call I overheard from our home office, Jack speaking quietly. "She doesn't suspect anything. We'll have plenty of time to get everything in order." I hadn't wanted to believe what the evidence suggested. Jack and I had built a life together, weathered countless challenges side by side. The possibility that he was planning to abandon me, and worse, to take our life savings in the process, seemed inconceivable, despite the mounting evidence. Which is why, reluctantly but methodically, I had begun to prepare for the worst. 2 weeks before my mother's scheduled surgery, I came home early from work with a migraine. The house was quiet. Jack should have been at his office, but his car was in the driveway. Not wanting to disturb him if he was working from home, I slipped in quietly through the side door. The sound of his voice drew me toward our home office. The door was ajar and Jack was on a video call, his back to the entrance. I froze when I heard my name. "Martha has no idea," he was saying, sounding amused. "She still thinks we're the perfect team. Meanwhile, I've got access to everything: joint accounts, investments, even her inheritance from her father." A woman's voice responded from the computer. "And you're sure the timing works? I don't want to be stuck in limbo waiting for you." "It's perfect," Jack assured her. "Her mother's surgery is scheduled for the 15th. Martha will be completely focused on that. I'll transfer everything that morning, and by the time she realizes what's happened, I'll be on my way to you. We can be out of the country by the end of the month." "What if she contests it legally?" the woman asked. Jack laughed. "On what grounds? My name is on all the accounts. Besides, the money trail will be impossible to follow once I've moved it offshore. Trust me, I've thought of everything." I backed away silently, retreating to my car where I sat gripping the steering wheel, nauseous with betrayal. 26 years of marriage, and Jack was plotting to steal everything mostly I, had worked for, while I was at my mother's surgery, no less. And clearly, he'd been planning this with another woman for some time. The initial shock gave way to cold, clear focus, the same analytical mindset that had made me successful in accounting. I drove to a coffee shop, ordered a tea I couldn't taste, and made a list of what I knew and what I needed to do. Jack had access to our joint accounts, yes, but he didn't know about the separate account I'd opened last month after noticing the suspicious login attempts. I'd transferred $50,000 there, enough to cover my mother's medical expenses and keep us afloat temporarily. It wasn't nearly what I deserved after decades of supporting our household, but it was something. More importantly, Jack didn't realize that my background in forensic accounting meant I understood exactly how to document financial misconduct. The question was whether I had enough time to gather evidence and protect our assets before he made his move. That evening, I returned home and greeted Jack normally, giving no indication of what I'd overheard. He kissed my cheek absently, asked about my migraine, and returned to watching television as if he hadn't spent the afternoon planning to destroy my financial security. "I'm worried about Mom's surgery," I told him, watching his expression carefully. "The recovery will be difficult." "Try not to stress," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "Everything will work out." The calm certainty in his voice, knowing what he was actually planning, made something harden inside me. I excused myself to make dinner, my mind already mapping out the calls I needed to make first thing tomorrow. To my bank, to a security company, and most importantly, to Patricia Wilson, the best divorce attorney in Chicago. Jack thought he had planned the perfect escape. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. The morning after discovering Jack's betrayal, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. As soon as Jack left for his office, I began implementing my protection plan. My first call was to Patricia Wilson, who listened to my situation with professional calm. "This is a clear case of premeditated financial fraud," she said after I described what I'd overheard. "We need to act quickly but carefully. Have you documented the conversation?" "No," I admitted. "I wasn't prepared." "Then our first priority is gathering evidence. Without proof, it becomes your word against his." Patricia outlined the steps we needed to take: installing security cameras in our home office, documenting all account activities, collecting evidence of Jack's relationship with this other woman, and preparing for emergency legal actions the moment he made his move. "Don't confront him," she warned. "Let him think his plan is working. We need him to act so we can catch him red-handed." Over the next week, I became an actress in my own home, maintaining a facade of normalcy while systematically preparing for Jack's betrayal. I installed tiny security cameras in our home office, capturing Jack's continued planning calls. I worked with a forensic accountant recommended by Patricia to document the history of our accounts, proving that the majority of funds came from my income. I even hired a private investigator who quickly identified the woman on the video call as Veronica Daniels, a 38-year-old former client of Jack's with whom he'd been having an affair for at least 8 months. Most importantly, I worked with my bank to place monitoring flags on all our accounts, ensuring I would receive immediate notification of any large transfers or withdrawal attempts. I couldn't prevent Jack from accessing the accounts without tipping him off, but I could ensure his actions were documented when the time came. The waiting was excruciating. Each evening, I prepared dinner, discussed mundane topics, and slept beside the man who was actively plotting to leave me destitute. Jack noticed nothing amiss, so convinced of his own cleverness that he never questioned why I wasn't questioning him. 3 days before my mother's surgery, the private investigator delivered additional evidence. Jack had rented an apartment in Miami under a new LLC, purchased plane tickets for himself and Veronica, and opened offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The plan was clearly imminent. That night, Jack was unusually attentive, asking detailed questions about my mother's upcoming procedure, the hospital location, how long I planned to stay with her. I provided truthful answers, watching him mentally catalog the information he would use against me. "I wish I could be there," he said, his concerns so convincingly genuine that for a moment I almost doubted the evidence. "But that client meeting in Denver can't be rescheduled." There was no client meeting in Denver. The private investigator had confirmed his ticket to Miami was for the exact day of my mother's surgery. "I understand," I said, squeezing his hand. "Work is important." The night before the surgery, I lay awake beside Jack, my mind racing through final preparations. Patricia had all the documentation needed for emergency filings the moment Jack made his move. The bank was on high alert for suspicious transactions. I had secured enough funds in my separate account to cover immediate needs. Everything was in place except for one crucial element: definitive proof of Jack's intent. The security cameras had captured conversations, yes, but nothing explicitly stating his plan to empty our accounts while I was at the hospital. Without that, Patricia warned, we might face a lengthier legal battle. "Try to get him to say something incriminating," she had advised. "A text, an email, anything that clearly shows premeditation." But Jack had been frustratingly careful in our communications, keeping his responses vague and deniable. As dawn approached, I realized I was out of time. My mother's surgery was scheduled for 9 a.m., and I needed to be there. I would have to trust that the preparations I'd made would be enough. I had no idea that Jack himself was about to provide the final piece of evidence I needed, in the cruelest way possible. The hospital waiting room was busier than I expected, filled with anxious family members and the antiseptic smell that never quite masked the underlying scent of illness. My mother had been prepped for surgery, her face pale but determined as they wheeled her toward the operating room. You'll be here when I wake up? She asked, her voice thin with medication and fear. Of course, I promised, squeezing her hand before the nurses took her away. I settled into an uncomfortable chair, checking my phone obsessively for any banking alerts. Nothing yet. Perhaps Jack was waiting until he was certain I was occupied with the surgery. Or perhaps a small, hopeful voice whispered, I had misunderstood everything, and he truly was in Denver for a client meeting. That hope died at 10:17 a.m. when my phone rang, Jack's name lighting up the screen. I answered cautiously, conscious of the people around me. How's your mother? He asked, his voice deliberately casual. She's in surgery now, I replied. Everything okay? There was a brief pause, then, Actually, Martha, there's something I need to tell you. My heart raced, though I kept my voice steady. What is it? I've emptied our accounts and I'm moving to Miami. Good luck with your annoying mom. His laughter, cruel and triumphant, echoed through the phone. 26 years of marriage and I'm finally free. I've transferred everything. Checking, savings, investment accounts. All gone. I deserve this. Although I'd been preparing for exactly this moment, the casual cruelty still stunned me. My mother was in brain surgery, and Jack was laughing about leaving me financially devastated. I understand, I managed to say, my lawyer's instructions echoing in my mind. Get him to admit everything. Create a record. You've taken all our money while I'm at my mother's surgery? Every penny, he confirmed, sounding pleased with himself. The transfers are already done. By the time you figure out how to fight this legally, the money will be untraceable. And you're in Miami now? I asked, my phone recording every word. Beautiful South Beach. Veronica and I are celebrating as we speak. Don't bother trying to find us. The condo isn't in my name. Jack, why are you doing this? The question wasn't part of my strategy, but I couldn't help asking. He snorted. Because I can, Martha. Because I'm tired of your boring, responsible life. Because I deserve more than being married to someone who prioritizes her sick mother over her husband. Consider this payment for all the years I wasted with you. After he hung up, I sat motionless, the recorded conversation saved to my phone. Then I sent it to Patricia with a simple message. It's happened. He just called and confessed everything. Her response was immediate. Perfect evidence. Filing emergency orders now. Don't worry about anything except your mother. Relief washed over me, followed by a strange sense of calm. Everything we had prepared for was now in motion. While Jack celebrated his apparent victory, Patricia was submitting emergency motions to freeze all our accounts, presenting the evidence we had gathered to show clear intent to defraud. I hadn't expected Jack to be so explicit in his confession, to create such perfect evidence against himself. His arrogance had finally worked in my favor. 3 hours later, as the surgeon came to tell me my mother's procedure had been successful, my phone pinged with banking alerts. Unusual activity detected. Accounts frozen pending fraud investigation. Minutes later, Patricia texted, Judge granted emergency freeze. All transfers halted. The funds he moved this morning are being returned to escrow pending hearing. We've got him. Jack thought he had executed the perfect escape. He had no idea he had just walked into a trap years in the making, one constructed by the boring, responsible wife he had so badly underestimated. My mother's recovery room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. She slept peacefully, the surgery a success according to her doctors. I sat beside her bed, my phone continuously buzzing with updates from Patricia about the rapidly unfolding legal situation. The emergency financial restraining order had been just the beginning. Armed with the recorded phone call, security camera footage, and the detailed financial forensics we had prepared, Patricia had convinced the judge to issue a comprehensive asset freeze. Not just our joint accounts, but Jack's personal accounts, the offshore transfers, and even the LLC he had used to rent the Miami condo. The judge was particularly disturbed by the timing, Patricia texted. Stealing marital assets while a spouse is dealing with a parent's medical emergency shows exceptional cruelty. We're in a strong position. Around midnight, my phone rang. A Miami area code I didn't recognize. I stepped into the hallway to answer. "Is this Martha Calloway?" A woman's voice asked, tense and angry. "Yes, who's this?" "Veronica Daniels. Your husband says you've frozen our money." Our money. The casual ownership in her voice made my blood boil, but I kept my tone even. "I've frozen my money, which Jack illegally attempted to transfer while I was at my mother's brain surgery." "He said those accounts belong to him." "Then he lied to you, just like he's been lying to me for months." I paused, considering my next words carefully. "Did you know that most of those funds came from my income? That I supported him through 3 career changes and a failed business? That I've been the primary breadwinner for most of our 26-year marriage?" Her silence suggested Jack had painted a very different picture. "The courts have frozen those assets pending a hearing," I continued. "If you're involved with Jack for his money, you should know there might not be much left when this is over." "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "Jack told me you were vindictive, but this is beyond—" "Vindictive?" I interrupted, my composure finally cracking. "My mother is recovering from brain surgery. My husband, who I supported for decades, emptied our accounts and laughed about it while I was in the hospital. Then he told me I deserved it for being a boring, responsible person. Is protecting myself from financial ruin really vindictive, Veronica?" Before she could answer, I heard Jack's voice in the background. "Who are you talking to?" "Give me the phone." "Martha," he growled after presumably grabbing the device. "What the hell have you done?" "Exactly what you would expect from the boring, responsible spouse you've taken advantage of for years," I replied. I protected myself. "The accounts are frozen, the credit cards aren't working, even the condo payment has been flagged." "That's unfortunate," I said, echoing his dismissive tone from that morning. "Perhaps Veronica can support you for a while. I'm sure her intentions are pure, not at all related to the money you promised her." "You planned this," he accused, his voice rising. "You knew I was going to transfer the money." And there it was, another admission for the record. My phone was still recording. "Yes, Jack, I did know. I've known for weeks. Every conversation you had in our home office is on video. Every plan you made is documented. Every transfer you attempted is flagged as fraudulent. But please, keep talking. Your confessions are extremely helpful to my attorney." He fell silent, finally understanding the depth of his miscalculation. "One more thing," I added. "Patricia Wilson will be contacting you tomorrow about the divorce proceedings. I suggest you find your own lawyer. A good one." I ended the call and returned to my mother's room, a mix of emotions swirling through me. Sadness for the marriage I had believed in, anger at Jack's betrayal, but predominantly a profound sense of vindication. Jack had underestimated me because he thought my responsible nature made me predictable, even boring. He was about to discover that responsible people make the most formidable opponents when they decide to fight back. 3 days after Jack's phone call, as my mother was being moved to the rehabilitation facility, a courier delivered a thick envelope to her hospital room. Inside was a complete dossier prepared by Patricia, copies of the emergency financial orders, confirmation that all transferred funds had been recovered and placed in court-monitored accounts, and preliminary divorce filings citing Jack's egregious financial misconduct and marital abandonment. Most satisfying was the affidavit from the Miami-Dade County Sheriff's Office, confirming they had personally served Jack with the legal documents at his beachfront hotel. The officer noted that the subject appeared visibly distressed upon receiving the papers. Also included was a thumb drive containing security footage from our home office, footage that clearly showed Jack explaining to Veronica how he planned to steal our life savings while I was at my mother's surgery. Patricia had highlighted specific timestamps with transcriptions of the most damning statements. But the piece that brought tears to my eyes was the judge's preliminary ruling, which specifically mentioned Jack's callous disregard for spouse during family health crisis as a factor in granting the emergency orders. The court had not only frozen all funds Jack had attempted to transfer, but had also authorized $75,000 to be released immediately to my separate account for my mother's medical expenses and my living costs during the proceedings. That afternoon, I received a text message from an unknown number. The hotel is demanding payment. Jack's card was declined. Can you please transfer money so we're not thrown out? Veronica's desperation was palpable even through text. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Patricia, who added it to our growing evidence file. That evening, as I sat beside my mother's bed helping her with dinner, my phone rang again, Jack's number. I declined the call and blocked him. There was nothing left to say. The legal system would handle the rest of our communication, and Jack was finally experiencing the consequences of his actions. The husband who had laughed while emptying our accounts wasn't laughing anymore. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom as the judge delivered the final divorce decree. Jack sat at the defense table, a shadow of his former confident self. His attorney, the third one he'd hired after the first two withdrew from his case, looked resigned. In consideration of the documented financial misconduct, the duration of the marriage, and the plaintiff's significant contributions to marital assets, the court awards Mrs. Calloway 85% of all marital property, the judge announced. Additionally, Mr. Calloway shall be responsible for all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Calloway in these proceedings. The judgment was even more favorable than Patricia had predicted. Jack's attempts to contest the evidence had backfired spectacularly, particularly when the judge heard the recorded phone call where he laughed about leaving me financially stranded during my mother's surgery. As we exited the courtroom, Jack attempted to approach me. "Martha, this isn't fair. I made mistakes, but—" "Your Honor," Patricia called to the judge, who was still gathering her papers. "The defendant is attempting to contact my client directly despite the communication order." The judge's sharp reprimand sent Jack scurrying back to his attorney, his face flushed with humiliation. Outside, I took a deep breath of the crisp Chicago air, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Congratulations," Patricia said, squeezing my arm. "It's officially over." That evening, I visited my mother at her apartment, where she was continuing her recovery with the help of a part-time aide. Her progress had been remarkable. She was walking independently, her speech almost back to normal. "How did it go?" she asked as I joined her for dinner. "It's done," I replied. "The divorce is final." She studied my face. "And how do you feel?" I considered the question carefully. "Ready," I finally said. "Ready to start the next chapter." "Without Jack holding you back, I have a feeling it will be your best one yet." She smiled, raising her glass in a toast. I clinked my glass against hers, knowing she was right. In trying to destroy me, Jack had inadvertently set me free.